Hello everybody and welcome back to another Host Productions product review. In today's review I'm going to be taking a look at one of the latest releases from the Doctor Who Demon Music Group record series. This time round it is two Third Doctor adventures pressed onto record for the first ever time, being The Paradise of Death and The Ghosts of Space, as written by Barry Letts, featuring John Pertwee as the Third Doctor, Elisabeth Sladen as Sarah Jane Smith and Nicholas Courtney as the Brigadier. Now for those of you that were unaware that these stories existed, basically you are very much like myself, as prior to the release of this record collector set, I had no idea that John Pertwee featured in some radio adventures within the 1990s, and the saddest thing about this product is that sadly all of the main protagonists are no longer with us, making for a very exciting yet sad piece of Doctor Who history. In fact, both of these adventures are pretty much John Pertwee's last ever contribution to the Doctor Who universe, and because of that, I was very excited to be taking a look at this product and experiencing the stories for the first ever time. As per usual with this record collector set series, this product has been released in two different versions. The first of which that I'm going to be taking a look at in today's review is the limited edition Amazon exclusive version that is limited to 500 pressings. This does in fact feature a special splatter variation of vinyl in pink and green. The standard variation is available from a number of different retailers, including Amazon also, as well as I do believe Zoom. This one isn't strictly limited and I do believe is pretty much exactly the same price. Now the actual cover art itself is exactly the same for both of the releases, as well as the actual media featured on the records themselves. However, the main difference is with the limited edition version you have a lovely splatter vinyl, and for the standard version you have a plain blue and yellow vinyl. This is in fact a 6-record set, meaning that it is in fact just as wide as the original Daleks Master Plan record release, also a part of this series. Now this review is in fact quite a long time coming, because this product was released I do believe in very early 2020, however due to a few things going on, of course due to the COVID-19 pandemic, then me studying for university exams and all of that, there's been quite a lot of delay, and I also lost a little bit of footage for this review as well, meaning that I then needed to go back and film it once I was back at home, which I now am for the summer. So I do apologise if you've been waiting for this review, as it has been delayed for quite a while. However, I am reviewing it now I suppose, and I'm very excited to be taking a look at this product, as I say, arguably a bit more excited than the regular Demon Music Group releases, because of course we all know that the Abominable Snowman exists, or the Evil of the Daleks exists. This is kind of an obscure bit of Doctor Who history that I've only just discovered as a Doctor Who fan, and being a Doctor Who fan for quite a lot of years now, that is always a very exciting occurrence. So taking a look at the cover art for this release, of course, is a lovely collector's set, and they've gone rather experimental this time round. We don't have any image of John Pertwee on the cover or anything like that, neither do we have the main monsters of the piece, I suppose. Normally we are used to the Yeti being in the very middle, or the Daleks being the main focus of the artwork. This time round, rather simply and brilliantly, we have the inclusion of the classic series TARDIS key, a lovely design looking very alien indeed, with of course this brilliant reflection coming off the very middle. In case you aren't aware already, basically the cover art splits directly down the middle to have the Paradise of Death on one side and the Ghosts of Space on the other, and rather cleverly of course the background colours also represent the colour of the records featured within this collector set. So as per usual, at the top of the box we do get the BBC logo, along with the new series Doctor Who logo in a lovely silver embossing. Just below this we also have the titles of both of the audio dramas, being The Paradise of Death, which is a 5-part story, and The Ghosts of Space being a 6-part story. And of course at the very bottom, and different to your usual releases, as opposed to having original television soundtrack, we have original BBC radio dramas. So firstly, taking a look at the Paradise of Death side of the cover art, of course we have this lovely pinky red design along with a yellowy vortex coming around the side, as well as a number of different pieces from the story, including the logo for Space World, which is the main setting for the early half of the episode itself, as well as the rocket, which does of course go into space, and we also have the spaceship from the episode itself with a darker coloured background, making all of these different components stand out very nicely. And then on the opposite side, we have my favourite part of the cover art, as we have the ghosts of N-Space. A lovely limey green. Of course, again, this is reflected on the TARDIS key, with a few yellowy parts of vortex coming around the side. As opposed to the rockets and the space age stuff, we have some rather brilliant ghosts, including some jellyfish, and of course this unusual looking bird creature at the very top, again really evoking the sense of the story and the different coasts that the Doctor and his team encounter throughout the episode. In fact, these are lovely visual representations of what you see throughout the story, and when listening to this episode I couldn't help but refer to this cover art to kind of visualise the episode itself. So this collector set is in fact a 6-hull records, meaning that there is a pretty decent weight to it. And of course on the very back we do get another lovely piece of artwork, this time round focused on the TARDIS. Now this is the same 3D design that has been used for all of the Demon Music Group Classic Series releases so far, so it is a design that we are very used to, a nice representation of the TARDIS, if ever so slightly simplified. So we have all of the signage that you would come to expect, the lantern at the very top. However, of course, a lovely touch is again we have that continuation of the divide down the middle, and this time we have the reflection of the colours on the TARDIS itself, some rather lovely bright pinks, oranges towards the side, as well as a little bit of yellow in there as well, with of course the pink at one side and the green at the other. As per usual, when it comes to the Doctor Who Demon Music Group record releases, they have failed to disappoint when it comes to quality and presentation, as the case itself is made out of a lovely high quality cardboard, with of course the design printed on the very top with a usual wrapping, and of course the embossed finish there as well on the Doctor Who logo. This is a high quality cardboard that is very secure and strong, meaning that it does protect the records on the inside of the box, but also at the same time make the product overall feel like a premium item. A really lovely design choice is on the inside of the base of the box as well as the lid. We do of course have your usual design of vortex, however as opposed to it just being one colour, once again we have that divide down the middle. So on the inside of the lid that vibrant pink vortex, and of course on the inside of the base we have the green vortex. Of course, due to that white emanating from the middle, it does almost look like two pairs of eyes staring out. The first thing that you are greeted by when you open the collector's set, as per usual, is a sheet of paper which continues the casting credits for each story. So taking a look at the Paradise of Death side, it states that this episode was written by Barry Letts and first broadcast on BBC Radio 5 between the 27th of August and the 24th of September 1993. It does also state at the bottom a few production credits stating that this collector's set was designed and the layout was created by Oink Creative, and the illustration were created by Louise Barden and Daniel Ascom. Then flipping around to the opposite side, we have the casting credits once again, this time round for the Ghosts of N-Space. That was first broadcast on BBC Radio 2 between the 20th of January and the 24th of February 1996. A similar design to that of the front of the box is also used on the individual record sleeves, involving a rather lovely design of the TARDIS key, with of course the number engraved within the middle, being of course the top 3 for the Paradise of Death and the bottom 3 for the Ghosts of N-Space. And then turning around the LP sleeves to take a look at the opposite side, we have what is possibly my favourite part of this product as a whole. Two rather brilliant looking landscapes depicting two of the locations seen throughout both of these audio drama stories. Now, due to these episodes being audio dramas, we don't really have any visual aid as to what the locations within the story would have looked like, so Demon Music Group have took it upon themselves to design these two rather brilliant looking landscapes, which is a lovely visual reference for when listening to these stories whilst you play the records. So at the very top we have the lovely space world environment, of course on Hampstead Heath, with the London landscape there in the background, including lots of known landmarks, including St Paul's Cathedral and the BT Tower over there as well, and of course the space world environment being in the forefront and a few spaceships in the background. And then of course for the Ghosts of N-Space we have a much more gloomy, almost gothic horror of Fang Rock-esque design, sea rather brilliantly rippling at the very bottom there, and the brilliant and wacky Ghosts of N-Space running around the castle, with of course the lightning coming down as well. Two absolutely brilliant designs and a lovely poster, and a brilliant use of colour once again that is similar to that seen on the front cover case for this product. Of course, the main thing that sets this collector's set apart from the standard edition is the design that is used on the record itself. So for the Paradise of Death, we have a rather vibrant looking pink, very much like the cover art itself, and then we have this spiral splatter design coming around the side with lots of different purple pigments also in there as well, with the yellowy vortex emanating from the very middle. Of course, the first LP for the set has media on one side and then the opposite side is blank due to this being a 5-part story. As for the Ghosts of N-Space vinyl, this is ever so slightly more experimental compared to that of the Paradise of Death, and once again is a bit more visually exciting compared to the standard edition. So the main base is of course a translucent clear vinyl, and then on top of this we have a green fluttered design coming around the side, almost looking like the silhouettes that we see of the ghosts themselves on the cover art for this piece. And of course this is one standard green that is used all the way throughout the record. Of course this is the same for all 3 records for the Ghost of N-Space, however they do ever so slightly vary between each individual record as always. So overall, for the Doctor Who Demon Music Group Third Doctor Adventures of the Paradise of Death and the Ghosts of N-Space, both written by Barry Letts, pressed onto heavyweight vinyl, a lovely collector set. Again, I think that Demon Music Group have a way with presentation that is so satisfying, and normally I'm not really a fan of simplified designs, especially the likes of, say, the TARDIS exterior seen on the back of the box here, or even on the record sleeves. Normally I like to see detail within images. However, I think there's a lovely design that is used with the Demon Music Group releases that is both simple but also rather complex. These lovely designs featured on the ghosts here on the N-Space cover, and the several different spaceships seen throughout the Paradise of Death. It makes for a lovely product to have on the shelf, and it's something that's more exciting compared to that's just a standard CD or cassette, which was of course the original way these episodes were released after their broadcast on the radio. If you are a fan of the Third Doctor era, then I would dare say this is a must for you, especially if you have a record turntable. However, naturally of course, if you are somebody who doesn't have a turntable, this is no doubt a product that I recommend not purchasing, or purchasing a turntable and then purchasing this product because you want to play it on the turntable. Either way, collecting records is a niche thing. It's something that will not appeal to everybody. Some people acknowledge the fact that records, yes, are more expensive than your regular CD. However, they are worth it because they're more exciting, they're more collectible, and generally it's just something that looks a bit better than a standard, regular, dull, boring CD. And because of that, this makes for another set that is a really lovely addition to the collection, and arguably more exciting than, say, a regular Missing Doctor Who story, the likes of the Daleks' Master Plan and Evil of the Daleks. It's nice to have a rather niche part of Doctor Who history printed onto record for the first ever time. As to what one to purchase, if you are a collector, naturally of course I recommend getting the Amazon exclusive splatter variation of vinyl because it looks prettier than the regular plain one, it's more exciting, and of course in the long run that is the one that is more likely to sell out due to it being limited strictly to 500 pressings. However, that said, if you are watching this review and the exclusive one has sold out, the other version is still just as nice. It's just got plain vinyls as opposed to these lovely splatter ones. Of course the cover art itself is still exactly the same, and it will still make for a lovely product to add to the shelf if you don't have it already. And that is it for this part of the review. Of course, this video, as per usual, is going to be split into 2 parts. Now I've taken a look at the product itself, we now turn to take a look at both of the episodes. Going to be taking a look at the Paradise of Death and the Ghosts of N-Space individually, almost like they are Big Finish audio dramas as a part of my usual audio reviews. Now of course the unusual thing with both of these BBC radio releases is that they were recorded within the 1990s. I do believe both of them were in fact recorded in 1993. The Paradise of Death was broadcast in the same year, however the Ghosts of N-Space was later released in 1996 after the sad passing of John Pertwee. So the very special thing about these adventures is in fact that these are pretty much the last recordings and contributions of John Pertwee to the Doctor Who universe prior to his death. So if you are a fan of the Third Doctor, or simply like key moments within Doctor Who history, this is definitely a product that I recommend purchasing. I did in fact do a quick check online to see when these CDs were originally released. Of course it was broadcast on BBC Radio in the 1990s, and according to the Wikipedia it was also released on cassette around the same time, as well as this CD release as a part of the BBC Radio Collection series in the year 2000. So considering that it is now 2020, believe it or not, it has in fact been a number of years since its original physical CD release, meaning that I'm presuming, I've not checked this out, however I'm guessing that the CD might be quite hard to come by, so this is another reason, in fact, buy this LP collector set if you have a turntable. So turning to the first episode of the set, we do of course have The Paradise of Death as written by Barry Letts, who did of course have a big involvement within the Third Doctor era during the 1970s on TV. Now The Paradise of Death, unlike The Ghost of End Space, almost has an exact moment of when it apparently occurred within the Doctor Who canon, being in between the Time Warrior and the invasion of the dinosaurs. It is very clear by the start of this story that the relationship between the Third Doctor and Sarah Jane is still rather new. And we do of course also have Nicholas Courtney in there as well as the Brigadier. And I think that it does fit in as a part of this era, and it is nice to have an additional piece of continuity, especially given that on screen we only had one season between John Pertwee and Elisabeth Sladen, who then did of course go on to have a lot of episodes of Tom Baker as the Fourth Doctor, so it's always lovely to have another episode to add to the canon of this period within Doctor Who history. And I think that for the most part it does fit in quite well. I was actually quite surprised as how satisfyingly nice John Pertwee's voice is to listen to on audio. Of course, I've not listened to any big finishes with John Pertwee in, because those don't exist, sadly, due to his passing within the 1990s. So it's very unusual to start with actually listening to audio dramas with the actual John Pertwee. And I think that for the most part he definitely performs very well, and he definitely sounds like how he did back in the 1970s. Equally, Elisabeth Sladen, of course, she did go on to have a big finish series prior to the creation of the Sarah Jane Adventures, and she sounds brilliant. I think that Elisabeth Sladen just knows the role inside out, regardless of what format she's doing it within. If it is on a TV show, be it within Doctor Who or the Sarah Jane Adventures, or even within the audio drama format. And quite frankly, it makes my heart bleed to think that if she was still here with us today, she would no doubt still be doing either Sarah Jane Adventures or the occasional cameo on Big Finish. She may have even had a series alongside Tom Baker as the Fourth Doctor. But moving on from that point, because it is making me sad, and taking a look at The Paradise of Death, this is a rather sci-fi episode. It is more sci-fi than the other episode within this box set. It definitely feels a bit more like Fourth Doctor, Doctor Who, a bit more wacky and out there, and also uses a few of the elements that you see within the 80s era of the show, of course, which is one of the benefits of this episode being recorded within the 1990s. You get to see Barry Letts incorporating a few of the themes from stories that occurred within the 4th up until the 7th Doctor era, including the likes of sacrifices and the live broadcast executions that we get to hear throughout this story that is very familiar to that of Vengeance on Varos. Speaking of Vengeance on Varos, one of the other BBC radio plays to be released around this time was the 6th Doctor story Slipback, so considering that the Demon Music Group have released this story, I'm expecting a call-in record eventually. Please, Demon Music Group, I've never listened to that episode before, and it would be nice to have on record, admittedly, because it's Colin, and of course it would be. So the episode starts off at Hampstead Heath, where a massive playground has essentially been constructed, the equivalent of a British version of Disney World, and it is called Space World, rather conveniently enough. And it turns out that Space World does in fact feature aliens. It's a bit like a zoo, however the animals have been taken out and aliens have been put in place. And there is also this whole idea of virtual reality. If anything, this episode is in fact rather before its time. We have the Doctor and Sarah and the Brigadier using these headsets to kind of vision certain scenarios. For example, we have a moment very early on in the story where the Brigadier imagines that he is within a horse race or on a tropical beach, and it does feel very much like the modern day equivalent of, say, Oculus Rift, or even those virtual reality games that Doctor Who has had over the past few years. So it is very much like Barry Letts is seeing into the future. I think that is a very nice element of this story. It's definitely the aspect that I liked a lot more than the latter half of the episode. I love the idea of an alien race basically setting up a business in the middle of London that is aptly named Space World, and kind of the aliens are right under humanity's nose. The aliens behind it in fact kill somebody on the grounds of Space World, of course, and blame it on one of the aliens, and then throughout the later half of this story we see the episode being transported out into space. course, by travelling into space to the planet of Paracon, we get to learn more about the monsters of the serial, and a really nice touch is we get to see the Brigadier going off into space and actually becoming a bit more of a companion of the Doctor and him reacting to aliens on another world, which is a lot different to UNIT being around within an Earth-based story, and that is definitely something that I like about this episode, as well as the Ghosts of N-Space. We get to see Nicholas Courtney have a more involved role within the episode and kind of fulfill the companion role that you would normally see within classic serial Doctor Who, as opposed to the Brigadier, who is always kind of a bit of a blurred character between the realm of a companion and just a supporting character that is reoccurring throughout the series, because although he does appear in a lot of Third Doctor episodes, due to the vast majority of them being Earthbound, we never really see that time travelling through space and him reacting to other alien worlds, and we get to see them basically go to this planet that has been devastated by the events of the Paracon species, and we get to see almost a foreshadow into the future as to this is what will happen with Space World if the Doctor lets the aliens of the piece carry on with what they're doing. So it's nice, it's almost in a similar light to that of the Pyramids of Mars, where we get to see what Sutekh will do if the Fourth Doctor and Sarah don't stop him, and I think that it's a good way to show the threat of the story. However, it would have been good to have more parallels to Earth. Again, I wanted to see more of Space World as opposed to the more alien stuff, because I wasn't as intrigued by that. Of course, as I mentioned earlier, the episode has a concept of justice and cover-ups and corruption within there, and people being executed for their crimes, which again, considering that I'm a law student and I quite like episodes that theme around justice, such as the likes of The Stones of Blood, as well as Vengeance on Varro, so two very good Doctor Who classic serials I thoroughly enjoyed watching. This episode kind of has a similar feel to them, however, it doesn't really home in on that legal stuff as much, and justice and procedures being carried out. Again, it kind of slipped into the boundary of a stereotypical Fourth Doctor story that goes to another alien world and the Doctor needs to defeat the monster, although because it is on audio, we get to see a few more experimental stuff, such as the TARDIS team travelling on these giant bats around the alien landscape, as well as Sarah having a little bit more to do as well. She does in fact have a companion of her own, being Jeremy Fitz-Oliver, who is also seen within the Ghosts of N-Space, so we almost have Barry Letts developing another companion simply for this series, which does suggest that had John Pertwee not sadly passed away, we would have seen an expansion of these adventures and we would have seen the series continue. I think that for the most part, Jeremy Fitz-Oliver is okay. He's a little bit of comic relief. I definitely like his presence a lot more within the Ghosts of N-Space. I think he's a bit more of a companion that's fun to listen to. Within this story, he kind of sounds like a person who really doesn't want to be there and would rather be anywhere else but where he is, and because of that, he's not necessarily as fun to listen to. He's a bit like Tegan Javanka within the Fifth Doctor era of Doctor Who just constantly wants to leave. Of course, unlike the Ghosts of N-Space, the Paradise of Death is in fact only 5 parts long, meaning that although this episode is split across 3 LPs, the first LP featuring part 1 is in fact one-sided and the other side is completely blank, and I think that that is definitely a good choice. Had this episode been 6 parts long, I think it would have been dragging quite a lot. I think in fact the 5-part serial does also drag quite a lot, to be honest, and could have easily been dragged even further down to a 4-part story. However, perhaps if we had more of a focus on Space World, it would have been a bit easier to listen to, at least from my perspective, because considering this is still the second official BBC audio drama to be released from Doctor Who, I feel like they are getting to grips with what is going on. I think there is a difference between what happens within this story and the Ghost of N-Space. The Ghost of N-Space seems a little bit easier to listen to, I think, because the visual description is a lot better, and especially within the later half of this story, sometimes it takes a lot of effort to in fact figure out what is going on, what scenes we're hopping from, because the cast list is also considerably larger. So I think that definitely between the two, perhaps they learned a little bit more on how to present the audio drama format a little bit more effectively. Although for this story, I still think it's a good episode. I think had it been made now, there would have been more focus on Space World and the whole idea of ER being experienced reality. I love that concept within the story. However, I am only saying that because I'm listening to this episode within 20 2020. Sci-fi that deals with the likes of humans and their relationship with technology is something that is very much popular at the minute within sci-fi, so it kind of makes sense that I would want to see more of that. Perhaps at the time it wasn't as much a focus and the more spacey out there adventures were. However, because of that, I think I seen potential in another idea and wasn't necessarily exercised as much as I wanted it to be. The ending of the story does in fact reveal a rather dark consequence for the planets that Paracon have taken over, which again, it felt very much like vengeance on Varos. It has a very darker theme lying beneath it that we don't particularly explore as much. I don't know if that's just because this episode was airing at a certain time on the BBC, but that said, there is also a few unusual moments throughout this story that don't feel like actual classic series Doctor Who. The likes of the grimness of this story being humans being turned into fertilizer at the very end, but also we have the Third Doctor referencing a few more adult themes. We have him referencing a heroin addict and being addicted, which I thought was rather unusual, and there was also a few mild bits of language in there as well, which I thought was odd for a Doctor Who story, but again, that theme does seem to be transported across into the Ghosts of N-Space as well. These two stories do feel ever so slightly more adult, and I don't know if that's the intention, or I don't know if that's simply how radio drama was at the time. But overall, it's a decent story. It's got some fun sci-fi elements in there. I like the introduction of Jeremy Fitz-Oliver, and the main thing that I taken from the story overall was the relationship between John Pertwee, Elisabeth Sladen and Nicholas Courtney. If you are a fan of all of those characters, which the vast majority of Doctor Who fans are, this is definitely an episode for you because it expands on those characters as previously seen within the TV show, and to be honest, all three of the protagonists do an incredible job within the audio format. So now we move on to The Ghost of N-Space, as written by Barry Letts. Now this episode also features the same team as featured within the Paradise of Death, so we have John Pertwee as the Third Doctor, alongside Elisabeth Sladen as Sarah Jane Smith and Nicholas Courtney as the Brigadier. Now compared to the previous story, I feel like The Ghost of N-Space is more traditional Third Doctor. However, it still doesn't quite feel of the era. It feels like the Third Doctor produced within the 1980s or the 1990s, which is unusual, especially given that this episode is of course written by Barry Letts, somebody very much of the Third Doctor era, so you would think it would follow a very similar style. However, this story does feel quite refreshing. Of course, the same compliments that I said about the Paradise of Death do also apply to this story. The Ghosts of N-Space plays with the concepts of the paranormal and basically the boundaries between normal Earth and normal reality, and N-Space, also known as null space, where you have entities that have passed away and basically their consciousness being trapped within the realm of reality and the next life, and we have almost a concept of purgatory and the consciousness being within them both, meaning that those apparitions do of course get created to create the Ghosts of N-Space, making for what seems at the outset a rather traditional Doctor Who paranormal story, where what if we have a haunted style castle with of course the Brigadier's uncle, and we have ghosts around this castle. However, what happens if those ghosts are in fact ghosts, but there is a scientific explanation behind them? Again, very much like the previous story, one of the highlights of this episode for me is simply the relationship between the Third Doctor and Sarah Jane Smith. This episode feels a bit more focused around them as characters, as we get to see Sarah Jane and the Doctor going back in time within the castle's history, meeting different people throughout different periods, which does ultimately link back to the present day, where the Brigadier is based with the rest of the people within the castle. Of course, within this story, the Brigadier is in fact on holiday, going to visit his uncle, and he phones the Doctor up, having of course experienced these ghostly apparitions himself, and basically, as per usual of the Brigadier, what would have been a standard little holiday was in fact a massive science fiction adventure involving the Doctor and Sarah Jane Smith. And as I mentioned, it is simply just so lovely to be able to hear both John Pertwee and Elisabeth Sladen interacting with each other within the audio drama format. This episode, due to it being again 6 parts, allows for you to have a rather fun story, be it science fiction with a little bit of paranormal in there as well, but also at the same time, due to each episode being around half an hour, 25 minutes long, we have time to breathe within the narrative. We have a few scenes that simply pause the plot of the story. For example, we have a moment that in fact reminded me of the Day of the Doctor, where the Doctor and Sarah are trapped in a cell and we have them just having a little conversation, and likewise at the midpoint of the story where the Doctor feels like he has fixed everything and everything is okay, and we in fact find out that they've kind of set things in motion and they are the creators of the problem in the first place. We have them pausing for a moment and the Doctor referring back to a time on Gallifrey with one of his teachers, and they go on this little expedition within Gallifrey itself and walking around the land of Gallifrey, and it's lovely to hear John Pertwee talking about Gallifrey, because within this time within Doctor Who history, although the Gallifreyans of course exiled the Doctor to Gallifrey, we didn't really have too much talk about Gallifrey itself and living on Gallifrey, so it's nice to have a few moments such as that which provide a bit more insight into the Doctor's early life. And of course Sarah having a natural interest, it does say a lot considering that within the TV show John Pertwee and Sarah Jane Smith only had one season together. Their relationship instantly hit it off on screen, and it makes for a nice set of adventures that could very easily, although slightly different, still sit within the storylines of Doctor Who Season 11. I think that my only main criticisms of this story overall is that compared to the Paradise of Death, this story does feel rather technobabble. And I'm imagining, because this episode was of course initially broadcast on the radio and people would have needed to tune in probably each week to listen to this episode, because of course due to this being now released on record and I've listened to this episode in full within the space of one morning, you kind of know the story, you know the characters, you know what is going on. However, at the same time, I think that if I left each individual episode even a few days, it would take the story's flow away a little bit. I would constantly needing to be reminding myself who the different characters are, what is going on, because of the narrative's technicality. We have lots of sci-fi talk in there, the Third Doctor creating gadgets as he always does, again harking back to the era of the show that the Third Doctor belongs within. However, because of that, and when you introduce the paranormal element and different dimensions of null space and normal space and ghostly apparitions and a man called Maximilian who's trying to be a god, when you introduce all of that into the story, it can blow your mind a little bit. And there was multiple occasions throughout listening to the episode itself that I needed to pause the record, take it back a few minutes and re-listen again just to fully understand the story. And even then, looking back, I'm still a little bit unsure if I fully understood the narrative as a whole. Of course, due to this being in the early days of Doctor Who audio drama, prior to even the creation of Big Finish, it is very unusual thinking of it in that way. We do have a few elements in there, especially when Sarah Jane is talking, that is very visual description. There is a few unnatural scenes that sort of just describe what the Doctor is doing in the distance, as opposed to kind of working your way around it, which perhaps that is because Barry Letts, of course, did Doctor Who on TV as opposed to Doctor Who on radio, and those are two very different formats. I think people often underestimate how hard it is to write for audio and trying to describe what is going on visually without saying the Doctor smiled and then turned round and walked away. It's like that. You have a lot of those moments throughout this story. It doesn't necessarily take you out of the episode, but it can be a little bit jarring at points. In this story, we also have Jeremy Fitz-Oliver returning, as portrayed by Richard Pearce, and I must admit, I don't understand where he's came from. He's kind of Sarah Jane's journalist sidekick, who is kind of watching what she does in order for him to learn and go off and have a career of his own. And that's not to say I don't like his involvement within this story. If anything, the focus of this episode is more on the key protagonists from the TV show. He makes for a nice character. He's a little bit of clumsy comic relief, however, not too clumsy to the extent where he gets annoying. He's a nice character, and it is good to see Barry Letts in fact inventing a character which previously hasn't appeared on screen. So overall, for the Third Doctor adventure, The Ghosts of N-Space, I think the key thing that I've taken away from this story is the interactions between the Brigadier, the Doctor, and of course Sarah Jane Smith. That is the thing that makes this episode stand out. And if you are a fan of the Third Doctor era, I would dare say if you've not got the CD and you've not experienced this episode before, that said, even if you've got the CD and you just want a really pretty looking vinyl, this is an essential purchase for you. It is a key part of Doctor Who history and John Pertwee's last contribution to Doctor Who Who as a whole, which is very sad, but it makes this episode even more important and stand out. Due to the fact that it was also recorded in the 90s, it does have a different style to that of what was seen on TV, and it makes for a fun adventure, yet ever so complex in parts. Like the balance between the paranormal and the sci-fi, it makes for a fun story to listen to. However, when you start jumping into different time periods surrounding the castle, it can be a little bit hard to follow in points, especially due to it being a six-parter. I imagine if this story was perhaps 4 parts long as opposed to 6, it may have flowed ever so slightly better, with a few of the other less important characters being taken out, just to make the story a little bit easier to listen to. As I've said before, if I was listening to this episode back in the day on a weekly basis, I would probably be constantly stuck as to what was going on, but it still makes for a fun story and an enjoyable yet different Doctor Who adventure. So thank you very much for watching this review of the Demon Music Group Doctor Who Collector's Set featuring the Paradise of Death and the Ghosts of N-Space. I hope you have enjoyed it. Do of course stay tuned on The Host Productions for brand new Doctor Who product reviews and other content each and every week. And of course on that note, I shall see you all next time. Bye for now.